with me. Feels so good. So good.
So, I think we can start. We are already a little bit behind schedule. So, good afternoon, or even morning and evening, everyone. And welcome to the EU Non-Proliferation and Disarmament Conference 2022. Many thanks for joining us. My name is Ettore Greco. I am the Executive Vice President of the Istituto Affari Internazionali, International Affairs Institute of Rome. I'm very pleased to open the 11th edition of our annual conference, which is fully on record. Let me stress this at the beginning. My institute has been in charge of organizing this conference in the last 5 years within the framework of a EU-funded project on non-proliferation and disarmament, which started 12 years ago in 2010, following a EU Council decision. The project is implemented by a consortium of research centers, which also includes the FRS of Paris, the IAS of London, PRIF of Frankfurt, the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation, and CIPRI of Stockholm. CIPRI is responsible for the project overall direction and management. The consortium conducts its activities in close coordination with the European External Action Service, the European Commission, and other European institutions. Let me say that we are most grateful to them for their continued support and advice. The general mission of the consortium is, in a nutshell, to promote and contribute to the academic research and the strategic debate about non-proliferation and disarmament challenges. In doing that, we pursue a policy-oriented goal, which is a key dimension of our mission. This goal is to explore and discuss what the EU and the member states can do to make the Union's non-proliferation and disarmament strategies and policies more incisive. This is part, of course, as you know, of a wider discussion on the EU's role on the international scene, its capacity to be more united and cohesive in facing foreign policy challenges, and more effective in particular in consolidating its alliances and partnerships. As in the past conference, we will have a plenary session tomorrow, specifically devoted to assessing the state of play of the EU non-proliferation and disarmament agenda. The conference, like the other meetings that the consortium organizes, is meant to provide a forum where independent scholars and experts can share their analysis and ideas with the EU officials and representatives of international organizations and national governments. This is reflected, as you can see, in the composition of the conference panels. And I wish to thank all our speakers. Several of them come also from outside Europe, for accepting our invitation. In order to fulfill its mission, the consortium has promoted and consolidated a wide network of European study centers working on non-proliferation and disarmament, and conduct research more broadly on security and strategic issues. This network has gradually expanded and now includes more than 100 study centers from all EU countries, but also from 6 partner countries, which means I think I can say that a large portion of the European security research community is represented in the network. We, let me stress that, attach great importance to this networking effort, which is a key component of our mission. I think those who follow us on a more or less regular basis know that the consortium carries out a wide spectrum of activities. It holds public conferences and ad hoc expert meetings, produces both research and policy papers, carries out various educational activities, and organizes outreach initiatives. What I'd like to emphasize is that we have made a steady effort to expand and improve our activities in various directions. And 4 points, I think, are in particular worth mentioning. First, we have enlarged and diversified our effort, our offer of educational activity and the production of academic material on non-proliferation and disarmament matters. As a result, I believe our links with academia has also increased significantly. And let me stress that half of the members of our network are universities. Second, the network now involves new specializations and expertise, in particular technical and natural sciences experts and institutions. This is, as you know, key, absolutely crucial for assessing the new technological challenges and their impact on arms control. Third, we have been developing our dissemination and communication strategy, including through the creation of new tools, and I wish to invite all of you to consult the consortium website, which now provides an interactive platform, but also subscribe to our monthly newsletter. Fourth, in the last couple of years, we have launched various initiatives specifically targeted to the next generation and young women, with the goal of helping them to develop their professional careers and contributing to reducing the gender imbalance that we know still exists in our field. This includes a mentorship program for young women and an annual next generation workshop. This morning we held this year's next generation workshop. You may have noted here many new young faces. Indeed, all the mentees and young experts taking part in our program are with us today. In the last session of the conference, we will have the opportunity to discuss how we can further stimulate and promote the active involvement of young people in this research sector, and how, more generally, to make this field more diverse and inclusive. The general theme of last year's conference was obviously the deepening crisis of multilateral cooperation due to a number of factors, including the growing rivalry and tensions between major powers, the widening gaps that have emerged in arms control regimes, and the unsolved pending proliferation challenges. This remains a central topic to be discussed, and we want to examine what can be done, what the EU in particular can do to reverse this trend and possibly lay the groundwork for new forms of cooperation, considering that the EU's stated objective is not only to preserve the existing agreements and regimes, but also promote their universalization when needed and creation of more effective control and verification instruments. This year, however, our central focus, one of the central focus of our discussion will also be the war in Ukraine, the devastating impact that Russia's aggression has had on the European continent, its security system, and its far-reaching reverberations at the global level. This will be a theme that we expect to be discussed from different angles in various sessions, although we will have, as you may have seen in the agenda, a plenary session specifically dedicated to the implication and prospects of the war in Ukraine tomorrow afternoon. This afternoon, we will have two plenary sessions, one on the changing international security environment and the top priorities of the non-proliferation and disarmament agenda. The general question will be if less precarious relations based on mutual deterrence when needed, but especially based on trust and arms control cooperation can be rebuilt at the global and regional level. In the second plenary sessions this afternoon, we will discuss the outcome of the NPT review conference and what can be done to reduce the tension and cleavages between nuclear and non-nuclear states in view of preserving and possibly consolidating the current non-proliferation regime. Finally, tomorrow morning, we'll have two sets of 3 parallel sessions, so 6 in total, covering a wide range of issues. The focus will be on new and emerging threats, cyber attacks, militarization of space, biotechnology, missile proliferation, and lethal autonomous weapons, and what new arms control initiatives can be undertaken to counter those threats. There will be also a session, regional session, on proliferation risk in the Middle East, which of course remains a region of crucial importance for the European Union. So I hope this program, which I believe is rather rich but also demanding, will meet your interests, will prove stimulating so that we can concretely contribute to the advancement of our strategic thinking. Once again, I wish to thank the panelists and all of you for being with us today. I very much look forward to our debate. I have now the great pleasure to give the floor to Benedicta von Seer-Toss, Managing Director for Common Security and Defense Policy and Crisis Response at European External Action Service. Benedicta, over to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear Ettore Greco, it's a pleasure to be here with you and to be opening this conference, and even more so since you're all sitting here in person. I heard that the last few conferences took place virtually, and I think it's very good if we want to have vivid discussions and also have nice and useful bilateral side talks. So I encourage you to do that, and it's very nice for me. I only started last month to see you all and to meet with a non-proliferation and disarmament community so early onward in my time in Brussels. So very nice to be here with you. There are, of course, many issues that we need to tackle, and I hope that you have good recommendations on how to deal with them and ideally how to solve them. Before I delve into the details, I wish to thank the organizers, especially the Istituto Affari Internazionali, on behalf of the EU Non-Proliferation and Disarmament Consortium. Thank you for putting together this event with such an impressive agenda and a truly impressive list of speakers. Since the last conference took place about a year ago, the paradigms of both the global and European security architecture have changed drastically. The international security environment has deteriorated considerably, and this has negative implications on security and stability in various regions of the world, and in turn, it has a direct impact on our work on non-proliferation and disarmament in multilateral fora. In addition to Russia's full-scale war in Ukraine, the situation in the Korean Peninsula, and Iran's further developing of its nuclear program are worrisome. Moreover, we would like to see more transparency from China, especially in light of their rapidly increasing nuclear capabilities. We also seek Chinese engagement in support of the rules-based non-proliferation and disarmament order. By far the biggest reason for concern, though, is the Russian Federation, a major nuclear power and a member of the UN Security Council, which has invaded the sovereign country of Ukraine in blatant violation of the UN Charter. Russia is using a wide range of conventional weapons as well as cyber attacks, often in a manner that does not comply with international humanitarian law. Its deliberate attacks against the Ukrainian population and civilian infrastructure show a new and devastating tactic that is causing excessive injury and suffering. Furthermore, Russia has violated the security guarantees of the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, which Ukraine received after renouncing the nuclear weapons on its territory. Russia is now using dangerous rhetoric and repeated threats to use nuclear weapons and has put civil nuclear infrastructure at risk. The impact of the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine on arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation architecture has been heavy, even far beyond the war theater. It has hampered our work in most multilateral cooperation formats in one or another way, be it in the Conference on Disarmament, the recent NPT review conference, or the first UNGA, the first committee, or IAEA, just to name a few. The outcome of the 10th Review Conference on the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in August provided a good illustration of current challenges in multilateral non-proliferation and disarmament fora. Despite overall constructive discussions, it did not prove possible to adopt an outcome document due to Russia blocking consensus. The EU, along with other actors, was strongly engaged in preparations for the conference and has, as well as throughout the review conference. We deeply regret that no consensus was reached. Nevertheless, we need to insist on the full implementation of the legally binding obligations enshrined in the NPT and commitments from the past review conferences that remain valid. We are now looking forward to the next review cycle that will offer yet another urgent opportunity to achieve the progress that is needed to strengthen the NPT as the cornerstone of the global nuclear non-proliferation regime. More generally, it is and will remain the priority for the EU to uphold and strengthen the international nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament architecture, to universalize and insist on the full implementation of instruments against the developing and use of weapons of mass destruction. We need to insist on the implementation of the commitments taken by all countries in various formats. We need to push back on deliberate campaigns of Russian disinformation and work more closely, not only with our traditional like-minded, but also non-aligned in other countries around the world. We must also prevent further polarization and repetitive attempts to undermine standing principles in international regimes. Apart from nuclear challenges, the EU will continue to work on pressing issues related to countering other forms of weapons of mass destruction. In this context, we will continue to support the multilateral instruments against chemical and biological weapons. Our aim is to uphold the comprehensive legal prohibitions of these categories of weapons to ensure there can be no impunity for those who use them. We are firmly committed to contributing to a successful outcome of the 9th Review Conference of the BTWC and the 5th Review Conference of the CWC. The EU also strongly supports the UN Secretary General's mechanism for investigation of alleged use of chemical and biological weapons, which is the only independent international instrument in this regard. It should be safe from any pressure to subordinate it to political will of states. The EU will stand firmly against any attempt to undermine the independence and impartiality of OPCW and the UN Secretary General's mechanism. Unfortunately, the list of challenges is not complete yet. We also need to face the deteriorating situation in various regional security environments. We are increasingly concerned that Iran's continued actions are inconsistent with the JCPOA. This might have severe, and in the case of R&D activities, irreversible proliferation implications. Some of these actions do not have any plausible civilian justification. We strongly urge Iran to return without delay to full JCPOA implementation, including all transparency measures. The EU supports the intensive diplomatic efforts within the JCPOA Joint Commission and the contacts of the EU High Representative as JCPOA coordinator with all relevant partners. With this, we seek to achieve a return to the JCPOA by the United States and the resumption of full implementation of all JCPOA commitments by the United States and Iran. We also urge Iran to cooperate in full with the IAEA without any further delay or conditionality to resolve all pending safeguards issues in accordance with its legally binding obligations under its NPT Comprehensive Safeguards Agreement. Now, let me turn to the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. The unprecedented number of ballistic missiles it launched in 2022 represents an alarming illustration of its intention to continue undermining the global non-proliferation regime. This poses a grave threat to all nations and undermines international and regional peace and security. We strongly condemn the significant increase of illegal missile launches by the DPRK. This, of course, includes the recent intercontinental ballistic missile and short-range ballistic missile that landed south of the northern limit line. These actions represent a dangerous escalation of the DPRK's repeated violation of the UN Security Council resolutions. The DPRK's declarations that it will continue to develop its unlawful nuclear and missile capabilities remain a matter of grave concern. The same goes for the declarations that it would be prepared to engage in the first use of nuclear weapons and that it will not engage in negotiations aimed at returning to compliance with its obligations under the UN Security Council resolutions. Until the DPRK complies with these obligations, the EU will continue to implement strict sanctions, and we urge all UN members to fully implement all UN Security Council sanctions. To add to this already broad landscape of challenges, let me also devote a few words to conventional weapons. Russia's unjustified war of aggression against Ukraine has a significant impact not only on Ukraine, but also on the EU's neighborhood and EU internal security. The risk of diversion, illicit trafficking and misuse of firearms and small arms and light weapons, and their ammunition is significant. Therefore, the EU will continue supporting the Ukrainian authorities in addressing the challenges linked to the illicit trafficking of firearms and small arms and light weapons, for example, through its security sector assistance tools. EU member states agreed that the export of the military equipment is in full line with the legal obligations stemming from the common position on arms export and with obligations under the Arms Trade Treaty. Moreover, they are in line with the Wassenaar Agreement arrangement initial elements, which stipulate that this arrangement will not interfere with the rights of states to acquire legitimate means with which to defend themselves pursuant to Article 51 of the Charter of the United Nations. These norms prohibit exports towards an aggressor, not towards a state victim of external aggression. These days, the EU's unprecedented collected efforts in the provision of weaponry so desperately needed by Ukraine only reinforces our responsibilities and commitment to keep lethal weapons in authorized hands only. Given the many grave breaches by Russia of the Geneva Conventions, arms transfers to Russia would not be permitted under the Arms Trade Treaty. The EU has continuously urged all state parties to the ATT to refrain from any transfers to Russia. I could go on adding even more challenges to this already large list of pressing issues in the area of non-proliferation and disarmament that the EU is working on. Many more exist where our continued engagement is required. It is a joint effort of the EAS and its member states. We cooperate closely both at the level of capitals and in New York, Vienna, Geneva, and elsewhere in order to defend and promote our interests and advance our agenda. We also provide considerable funding in support of the implementation of the non-proliferation and disarmament objectives. The budget allocated for the NPD actions in 2022 was about 29 million euros. We also work closely with think tanks and the consortium that play a crucial role in promoting wider dialogue with stakeholders and raising awareness on these issues. Thank you for your important work in this respect. I now wish you a successful conference and many vivid discussions. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Benedicta. Yeah, it's picking up the sound, good. It always takes a few moments for a microphone to pick up the sounds. Also, on my behalf, a warm welcome to everyone, and I especially want to recognize Benedicta von Serratos for coming with us. It's great that so early in your new position you've joined us today and set out all these challenges for us. But also a big thank you to all of you for coming to Brussels, to joining us. It's really heartwarming to see so many people in one room and be able to engage. I think we have a lot of coffee breaks and a dinner included, so there'll be time for bilateral engagements, and that's just fantastic. I'm looking forward to that. But I also want to give a very special warm welcome to the participants of the Next Generation program. I hope you had a good workshop this morning, but it's great to see so many young faces and so many people from the Next Generation in this room. I'm looking forward to your active participation, to your questions. Don't be shy. I might regret saying that because maybe you are not shy and you'll overwhelm us with questions, but that's fine. I'm looking forward to that. And of course, a big thank you to IAI, Torre Greco and his team for putting together this conference, the first one in person in a different venue, which all makes that we need to find our way here and get the hang of the room, because we've always been at a different venue that was not available right now. But thanks again for organizing and for bringing such fantastic speakers and such a great group of participants here. So we have heard in the scene setter that we have a lot of challenges in front of us, and we'll try to address as many as we can in the conference. But I'd like to build on the major point in Benedicta's address, and that is that we are facing radical change in the global and European security architecture. Especially since our last conference, then our outlook wasn't very positive, but it's become much worse in the meantime. So in this first panel, we'll attempt to address the dilemmas that we face in arms control that are related to the present change. If we look at the current non-proliferation and disarmament architecture, it's very clear it has served us well in the past. It's been instrumental in preventing destabilizing arms races, reducing WMD threats over the past decades. Entire categories of WMD being outlawed. We have robust control mechanisms. And as imperfect as it was, it gave us a sense of stability. And the entire international community at least worked hard together to build mutual trust and to keep that progress. Now, at present, the reality is different. And that is really a paradigm shift for us, not only in the WMD domain, but also beyond. Practically every major agreement that we have has been challenged, maybe violated, maybe not to the letter, but its implementation is under political assault, with various reasons for this. And if we put that diplomatically, we call it growing tensions of major powers and a worsening international security environment. But that is really just a very nice way of saying that some states appear to be out to deconstruct the global security order in a hope that it will gain advantage for them. So in this panel, we're going to face this question. And we elaborated some guiding questions for the panelists. What can we do to reverse this trend? What should be the top priorities of the non-proliferation and disarmament agenda to do something about this? Is there a realistic prospect of a renewed strategic dialogue between major powers? Looking at my neighbor. Can we think today about rebuilding trust and arms control cooperation at the global and regional level? Should we do everything to save the arms control architecture that entered the 21st century? Or is it time to rethink our basic assumptions? And most importantly, if it needs to be inclusive, and little wonder that it needs, because disarmament by only some actors will benefit only the others, what do we do to keep all those actors on board to have an inclusive process? Now, to discuss these issues, we have a very distinguished panel. To my left, first of all, is Ambassador Bonnie Jenkins, who is the Undersecretary of State for Arms Control and International Security Affairs of the US. Next to her is Wyndham Smith, Director of NATO's Arms Control, Disarmament and Weapons of Mass Destruction Non-Proliferation Center, going by the cool name of ACDC. And next to her is Alexandre Vulik, Deputy Director of Strategic Affairs, Security and Disarmament of the Ministry of Europe and Foreign Affairs of the of France. Like in the past, we had also invited China to join us in this panel, and this year we had also invited India, but regretfully those were not able to join us today. But I just want to let you know that we had this outreach and we tried, and those of you that attended past events will probably remember, especially the Chinese input, which was always is interesting. With that, I'm going to turn it to the three speakers in this order, and then we'll open up the floor for questions and answers. I have been given an iPad that will collect the questions that are put online. But of course, I'll be looking first to the room here after the speakers finish their presentations to get the discussion going. With that, Bonnie, can I ask you, would you like to stay here or would you like to go up to the podium? It's we're flexible, whatever you like.
I think I'll stay here. Just hope my papers don't fly around and have to pick them up. So, first of all, thank you, Marjolein, for inviting me. Thank you to all of the organizers. I did have an opportunity to participate in the discussion last year. So it's great to be back here to have this discussion. Yes, things have changed in a year, and definitely more challenging, particularly on the issues of arms control and non-proliferation. Also, so wonderful to see folks. I'm still catching up to people after COVID, not having seen folks face to face. But also I'm seeing people regularly, you know, like I just saw you 2 weeks ago in New York, or I just saw you a few weeks ago in Vienna. So it's good to be back in this space where we're seeing folks again on a regular basis and continuing to develop these important relationships amongst the different countries on these important issues. And yes, about the next generation. So glad to see a lot of young people here, and certainly ask questions to us on this topic and all the other topics. And I can't tell you how many panels I'm on where this question is asked about arms control and the future of arms control, or what is the future of arms control. So I'm glad that this is being discussed on a regular basis at this challenging time. Having worked on WMD, non-proliferation disarmament, for over 30 years, I definitely believe in arms control and the importance of arms control. And I think, if anything, recent events has shown why it is important to have this kind of transparency, the need for engagement, the need to have conversations with countries, particularly the countries who are most challenging. And, you know, the basis of arms control is to try to provide some regulation in the international environment. And we certainly need it now. So I'm always been a strong supporter. So the future of arms control, I'm happy to have these conversations. So get to my points here. So of course, I'm very pleased to be here to represent the US and share some of the views that we have here with you today on some of our policies and actions on securing the future of arms control and international security. As you've heard, we are at an inflection point in a race to protect and strengthen the future of global democracy. We are increasingly faced with adversaries who challenge the rules-based international order from which they have also benefited. At the same time, we are entering more conflicts in new domains where rules of engagement are unclear or loosely defined. We have left the post-Cold War era and we are actively working to shape this new chapter of history. This new era is what President Biden calls the decisive decade. The scope and scale of threats have fundamentally changed. The ongoing invasion of Ukraine by Russia has only exacerbated the challenges to safety and security of the global world order, not just militarily and politically, but also economically, socially, agriculturally, technologically, impacting each of our everyday lives as global citizens. And there's more. The PRC's refusal to engage in transparency and confidence-building measures, the DPRK's continued attempts to expand its unlawful nuclear and ballistic missile programs, and Iran's continued nuclear escalations all undermine the international non-proliferation regimes, and by extension, global security and stability. Moreover, advancements in science and technology and increased globalization complicates and creates new challenges in the security domain. While emerging and disruptive technologies will provide enhanced capabilities for nations to deter threats and defend themselves, the use of technologies like artificial intelligence or cyber weapons in warfighting strategies and associated infrastructure may increase the risk of conflict, be it deliberate, inadvertent, or accidental risk. All the while, the spillover effects of the pandemic and the ongoing war in Europe have highlighted the need for us to look beyond the traditional areas of security and place additional and urgent importance on finding solutions for new and emerging challenges in arms control and international security. To many, today's global affairs and the complex intersection of different domains impacting global security may seem like we are at a crossroads, but I do not think that completely. When in doubt about the future, we can learn from the lessons of the past and find the strength to keep working together. 50 years ago, in 1972, that is exactly what the United States did with the Soviet Union. Despite years of tense competition and general hostilities, both governments were able to come together and discuss ways to lower the temperature, to find ways to infuse transparency and predictability into what was then becoming an increasingly risky situation. This led to the 1972 signing of the Interim Offensive Agreement on Strategic Offensive Arms as part of the umbrella Strategic Arms Limitation Talks, or SALT I, a foundational precursor to the New START Treaty. Working today with Russia is a challenge, no doubt. In August of this year, all states parties to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons came together to meet on the treaty, the cornerstone of the nuclear non-proliferation regime. While Russia alone chose to break consensus on an outcome document, I take comfort in the knowledge that every other country was prepared to come together and accept the draft text. As a result, the draft text remains a very useful framework for carrying forward cooperation to strengthen the NPT regime. The point of me raising all this is to remind us that we, as a collective, have preserved and prevailed in equally challenging times in the past, and that the United States will continue to find ways to take stock of challenges and find ways to address them by working closely with our allies and partners. In that process, we have and will continue to have many questions that need to be addressed and answered. As a global community, I urge all to recommit to the basic principles of international security and arms control that reduce risk and provide strategic stability, not in spite of the challenges facing international arms control agreement, but because of it. The recently released National Defense Strategy, under which both the Nuclear Posture Review and the Missile Defense Review are nested, maps out a blueprint for us to recommit to these fundamental foreign policy principles and address shared challenges through close collaboration with allies and partners. This is foundational to our U.S. national security interests and important for our collective ability to address these new security challenges. The PRC's growing nuclear arsenal and Russia's further invasion of Ukraine are stark reminders that nuclear risks remain a part of contemporary conflict. Against this backdrop, the United States Nuclear Posture Review affirms that the fundamental role of nuclear weapons is to deter nuclear attacks on the United States, our allies and partners. As per our declaratory policy, the United States would only consider the use of nuclear weapons in extreme circumstances to defend the vital interests of the United States or our allies and partners. At the same time, the NPR also recognizes that deterrence alone will not reduce nuclear dangers. As part of our commitment to reducing the role of nuclear weapons globally, the NPR renews the U.S. commitment to arms control and non-proliferation as vital elements of our balanced approach. American leadership in these areas is critical. In Europe, NATO remains the cornerstone of the transatlantic alliance, and our commitment to NATO remains rock solid. NATO actively contributes to effective and verifiable arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation efforts through its policies, activities, and the efforts of allied countries. NATO itself is not a party to any treaty, but it supports and facilitates dialogue among allies, partners, and other countries to implement their international obligations. On that point, the United States is pleased to plan and co-host the next annual NATO Weapons of Mass Destruction, Arms Control, Disarmament, and Non-Proliferation Conference next year to address key issues in the field and within the context of the evolving security environment. The United States' pursuit of relentless diplomacy, as President Biden said, will continue in the traditional domains of security, but also in new areas such as outer space. Weather forecasting, navigations, and communications are just a few of the many capabilities that depend on space stability and security. And when dangerous and irresponsible anti-satellite missile tests creates clouds of debris that endanger in satellites, other space objects, and current and future human space flights, we must all commit to reducing risk. That is why the United States took the lead in developing norms of responsible behavior relating to national security space and counter-space systems. The United States is grateful to the many co-sponsors and 154 member states at the UN First Committee who overwhelmingly supported our resolution, calling on countries to not conduct destructive, direct accident anti-satellite missile tests. This shows that we can establish new norms for risk reduction in future-oriented domains. The United States will continue to cooperate, collaborate, and coordinate with allies and partners in arms control, non-proliferation, and disarmament, all areas that play an indispensable role in global security. The future of arms control and international security will only grow in importance because stability is secured where de-escalation is possible. Tools of arms control, to include legally binding agreements alongside risk reduction and confidence-building measures, help make de-escalation possible. The current security environment in Europe demonstrates this, as does our competitors' pursuit of reckless and destabilizing buildups with no transparency. With this backdrop, in this decisive decade, the United States will continue to work with all countries to enable real progress toward global stability and security. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bonnie, for getting us started and for that important message that deterrence alone will not lower nuclear risks. So there's more that needs to be done, and there is still hope for arms control. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Wyndon.
Thank you. And again, I echo the thanks for the invitation and the thanks to be here. I guess I'll stay seated, although I'm also can stand up if it helps wake you all up. I feel like there's a little quiet over the crowd, but I'll stay here for now. So I'm going to try and be relatively short, also because I didn't have a chance to warn our host that I will have to leave a little early from the questions, but I at least wanted to get here. But I want to leave as much time as possible. So I'm going to just quickly frame the security environment from the NATO perspective. We've already heard a lot, and I think you all know it, but there are a couple of nuances from the NATO perspective, again, which I represent today. And then second, talk a little bit about the guiding question and some elements of those questions that were posed to us. And then give you a sense, as we look ahead, this future of how, at this point, we're really parsing that look into a short-term view, a mid, and a long, purposely not linking those to time frames because the security environment is so dynamic. But as we think about that short, mid, and long term, in a nutshell, essentially looking in the short term in a bolstering phase, where how do we bolster both our own deterrence and defense and security, but also bolster those regimes, as we've already heard today, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the Biological and Toxin Weapons Conventions, and others to sustain them and the rules-based international order. In the midterm, to think more about assessing those and other tools. What are the tools that we need to adapt to the technologies, to the environment? And then in the longer term, really that potentially reworking and continual adaptation. So something that, again, with an eye to the, I won't say young, but maybe new to the field, depending on how old or young you may be, to adapt maybe more than we have as a field, where we've had institutions and regimes that have been very successful, but also very long-standing, and we may need to be a bit more nimble. So quickly, and I've given you, the biggest takeaway right there is sort of the short, mid, and long term, but quickly on the security environment first. Again, from a NATO perspective, Russia really has shattered peace in Europe. We have been focused on the direct, symmetric threat of Russia for some time, but certainly following the Madrid summit and our refreshed strategic concept for NATO, calling very clearly, again, Russia as the most direct strategic threat, and then continuing to keep a focus on terrorism. And I think that is important in this chem, bio, rad, nuke world that's not just nuclear. We need to continue to keep a focus on the asymmetric threats as well as the other actors that we've heard about today from a number of speakers, DPRK, Iran, and the list goes on. To the framing questions, and I'm pulling out the piece that I think jumped here, can less precarious relations based on mutual deterrence, trust, and arms control cooperation be built at the global and regional levels? So it's a lot already to pull apart in that question. I think just quickly we would offer, yes, they can be built. I think there are opportunities in each of those areas, mutual deterrence, trust, and arms control cooperation. And yet, maybe not now is really the moment. And that particularly goes to the word trust. And there I would just underscore, I think we had a great example from Ambassador Jenkins. Arms control isn't always built on trust. Like, there are many examples of agreements and regimes being built at a time where trust was in fact quite low, or at least tensions were quite high. But we did have credible partnerships, right? There were credible, productive conversations, and I think that is what's missing right now, is a credible partner, and certainly defer to the United States on how that may proceed with New START and other direct bilateral agreements. But from a NATO perspective, thinking about our NATO-Russia Council and Russia no longer as a partner, we need to think about what trust means. And I would also offer some great work by the NATO Science and Technology Organization, and again, maybe to those newer in the field or supporting PhDs and others in the field, to think about what trust means. So it's not just, I think we innately think of a person-to-person, are you sitting across the table and negotiating in a trustful relationship? But there's also data, like trust in data and trust in information. And there's some interesting science being done on how can we verify the data or the information. And in the future of these arms control agreements, I think there's more to be done on the trust framework. A second point here is to think about common goals. We often hear the phrase common security and how there may be different understandings of how various partners at a table or a virtual table may think about common security. In NATO parlance, in our prior strategic concept, that was common space of peace, stability, and security. We now often say common security, but again, there's some nuanced differences in those understandings. And I think when you're coming to the future of arms control and agreements that will enhance strategic stability, enhance transparency, there's a need to come to a better understanding of what the various parties may mean by that common security framework. And then just a couple of points on, I think the key moment here, and I alluded to it in the opening, right now, at this moment, so in the short term, NATO is focused on enhancing the linkage between deterrence and defense and arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation. And I think, again, as you said, there are many folks happily in the crowd that I've seen many times over the last several months, and it's good to see you all again. And I think a shared conversation we've been having is a bit of the divergence that's occurred where deterrence and defense has become very strong. Certainly in NATO terms, we have doubled down on our deterrence and defense following the Madrid summit and many posture decisions. And yet arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation has seemed to cleave off wrongly, right? They need to be linked very closely. So I think we're quite proud from a NATO perspective of having brought those two back together in our strategic concept, where again, of the three core tasks of NATO, so deterrence and defense, crisis management, and the cooperative security, we've embedded arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation back in deterrence and defense with the argument that you must have them both. They are various tools of each of those, but they must be linked together. And I think us bringing that conversation back together will be very helpful, and I'm happy to talk about that more. And in the long run, as we do that, we also need to think about the tools within that arms control tool set. Again, regimes, legally binding treaties, political agreements, unilateral commitments that may garner international support, simply export control regimes and technology watches. There's a lot of work that can be done in the various tools of that tool set that can bolster our deterrence and defense in very different and unique ways. And I think part of that is rethinking how we call ourselves. So is it arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation? Or is it something else? Is it strategic predictability, or does that mean something nuclear? But how do we talk about our work in a way that doesn't push us into this niche place that seems so separate from the deterrence and defense and stability that's at play? So to close, just again, to recap where we are in our work and our thinking, as was rightly called out, NATO is not a party to any treaty. We are the forum for transatlantic consultation and cooperation, and it has been a really active time to do that with our allies and invitees and many of the partners, and I'm sure many are here in this room. So looking ahead, we do want to focus now in this short term as we see through the conflict at whatever time scale that may persist, to just bolster those instruments, those regimes, the rules-based international order, the sort of moral standards to which we uphold ourselves. And then in the midterm, do that solid assessment and rethinking of what tools will take us on the track, what technologies offer promise or peril as we proceed on that path. And then in that longer term, a way of rethinking how we adapt ourselves continually and how we continue to bolster deterrence and defense and monitor the success of what we do. So I will close there, and again, look forward to as many questions as I can fit in. I'm sorry for the somewhat premature departure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wenden. And I do realize you may need to leave earlier, but I'm already very happy that you were able to join us. I think it's the first time in one of these EU conferences that we have NATO speaking. And I think that is also a sign of the increased cooperation between the EU and NATO on many, many fronts. It's very good to hear you say that NATO will keep bolstering the existing multilateral instruments, but also at the same time that we need to rethink a number of concepts like trust, like common security, like how we call ourselves. So thanks for putting that out there. I'm sure there'll be many questions. And with that, moving to Alexandre.
Thank you, Marjolein. And thank you first to the EUNPD consortium for the invitation. The consortium is an essential actor for the debates and research across the European Union and on non-proliferation and disarmament issues. And we very much value the work done for the past 10 years. This conference is also, in our view, a way to make the EU more visible on these issues and to enable all actors in this domain to meet. I'm very glad to have this opportunity to intervene on this specific panel on the future of arms control and international security. I will try to put emphasis on the future of our security architecture from a French and, if I may, European perspective. As it has been mentioned already, the conditions for arms control negotiations have never been more difficult to meet than today. In particular, for the time being, re-engaging discussions on European security architecture at a time when war is back in Europe and being waged is very difficult, if not impossible. Nevertheless, the need for arms control and risk reduction measures has never been stronger for the same reason. Working towards the reinforcement of our arms control and confidence and security building measures architecture should still be an objective for the longer run. My first point would be to stress that we are in a situation in which the risk of military and nuclear competition is very real in a way we have not seen since the end of the 1960s. Russia wages a war of aggression against Ukraine in violation of international law as well as its commitments under the Budapest Memorandum, while resorting to an irresponsible nuclear rhetoric. This occurs in the context of an eroding international arms control architecture. In the nuclear realm, the New START Treaty, extended for 5 years in 2021, remains the last effective strategic nuclear treaty. In the conventional domain, remaining treaties and agreements are being put at test, to say the least, by Russia. In addition, the rapid emergence of new technologies make the need to promote a renewed international arms control agenda all the more urgent. Strategic stability, which the NATO Madrid summit reaffirmed as essential to collective security, is therefore at risk. Arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation work is, as a consequence, of utmost importance in a strategic context that carries high risks of escalation and leaves more room for unpredictability and instability. To try to answer some of the questions put forward, in the arms control domain, our priorities, seen from Paris at least, are twofold. First, we will need to collectively draw lessons from the implications of Russia's invasion of Ukraine on the rules-based international order and on the security architecture. In the nuclear realm, we will continue to call our American ally to try including Russian non-strategic nuclear weapons, which pose a major threat to European countries, in a follow-on agreement to the New START. We will support the efforts of the United States to negotiate such an agreement and deem crucial that they hold consultations to exchange on issues that have a direct impact on European security. Regarding conventional arms control, our priorities are well known. First, to preserve the OSCE acquis, including the Open Sky Treaty. Second, to adapt our instruments to current military realities and strategic context, notably the Vienna document. Third, to reinforce the arms control architecture, notably by closing the loopholes that have been exploited by Russia to circumvent its engagements and obligations. Second, it will be of paramount importance to set verification parameters that will help test the robustness of arms control proposals and verify future arms control commitments. It was already said, trust has to be defined. Trust goes better with verification. We know from the 80s, trust but verify. We went, unfortunately, to don't trust and verify. So verification is key. This is the most likely to lay the ground for more confidence and more predictability in international relations. Drawing from experience, it is obvious that we will have to increase transparency and verification measures, as well as to reinforce cooperation mechanisms and conflict prevention and management tools. On disarmament, we remain convinced of the relevance of a pragmatic and gradual approach that takes the prevailing security environment into account. The war in Ukraine has proven that the nuclear factor continues to play a central role in Russia's strategy. Our public response has always been to project confidence, resolve, and predictability. We refuse to fuel Russia's rhetorical escalation, but we need to make sure it fails. President Macron reiterated at the UN General Assembly on September the 21st that France is a responsible nuclear weapon state, and it's very, very much insisted also after the NPT RevCon how much this notion of responsibility of nuclear weapon states was key. Like the United States and the UK, France remains extremely clear and rigorous regarding its doctrine. While we need to accept that some allies and partners have internal public opinion debates and consensus, which we respect, of course, the role of nuclear deterrence in preventing the extension of the conflict to the rest of the European continent cannot be ignored. It will not serve our security interests to see nuclear deterrence undermined. It will only embolden Russia and other future aggressors. The current war demonstrates, perhaps more than ever in recent history, that unilateral nuclear disarmament would be akin to exposing ourselves and our partners to violence, to coercion, and to blackmail. In essence, jeopardizing our security and the very ability of democracies to defend their values. Disarmament is key, but defense is essential, and disarmament cannot be done at the expense of defense. To draw from a quote that some of you will certainly recognize, aggression is wrong, defense is right, whatever the means involved. Without an agreement of the morality of self-defense, we cannot count on the survival of societies that hold moral values so strongly that they call them human rights. All this to say that this is why France, during its P5 chairmanship ahead of the NPT RevCon, promoted a simple and positive agenda around three main priorities. First, to launch the launch of negotiations at the Conference on Disarmament of the Fissile Material Cutoff Treaty. Second, the rapid entry into force and universalization of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty and the strengthening of the international monitoring system. Third, the continuation of the work on verification of nuclear disarmament and on strategic risk reduction. We continue to support these priorities and deem it relevant in the current context to work on P5 issues that can actually help alleviate the situation in a concrete manner. Doctrines and strategic risk reduction. Now, the US chairmanship of the process has laid out reasonable options for Russian and Chinese experts to travel and hold an in-person meeting on doctrines and strategic risk reduction. We hope the issuance of the American NPR will be incentive enough to have them engage in this perspective in good faith. Many factors are having a profound impact on the non-proliferation agenda, and the Russian aggression has only worsened the situation. About the DPRK, the latest developments in North Korea justify more than ever our concerns regarding the situation on the peninsula, including reports of continued activity on the nuclear testing site. Pyongyang is taking advantage of the divisions within the United Nations Security Council, exacerbated by the war in Ukraine, to further develop its ballistic and nuclear programs without fear of new sanctions. About Iran, the JCPOA negotiations are currently, as you know, in a deadlock since Iran reintroduced 2 months ago its demands regarding the closure of the outstanding issues. Meanwhile, Tehran continued to develop its nuclear program and to test technology that is useful for its long-range ballistic programs in violation of its international obligations under the UN Security Council Resolution 2231. In this context, aggravated by the war of aggression of Russia against Ukraine, in violation of its commitments under the Budapest Memorandum, we must be steadfast in our commitment to ensure the respect of the international non-proliferation architecture and to respond in a united and determined way to the challenges posed by these actors. Regarding the DPRK, France remains steadfast in its commitment to increasing pressure on the regime. Any future provocation must be followed by swift, clear and firm action. The EU cohesion and unity in any response to any test which the DPRK would make is and will remain decisive. Regarding Iran, Iran must fully and without delay cooperate in good faith with the agency, the IAEA. The Director General has confirmed that there continues to be a lack of substantive progress on this issue. In light of this, we believe the board should send a clear sign to Iran that its cooperation with the agency must be forthcoming by adopting a resolution urging once again Iran to fulfill without delay its legal obligations under its comprehensive safeguards agreement. Finally, to touch upon the question on a renewed strategic dialogue between major powers, I think all this shows that it is all the more important to join our efforts to build a more robust global security architecture. I've mentioned the need for European unity, which is key, but I like to stress the importance of cross-regional discussions. For instance, and I'm sorry they are not here in the room, we count on our Chinese and Indian colleagues to pass on messages of de-escalation to Russia. There are several areas in which we deem important to have a dialogue with the main stakeholders. Just to name a few: transparency, confidence-building measures, or strategic risk reduction, as NATO allies agreed in the new NATO strategic concept, as it was said. There is no doubt that we should start with such dialogue, but it is also key to widen the conversation, to pragmatically focus on establishing and regulating behaviors. We started the effort for space, as it was said, as well as for the cyber space. And we need to remember and accept that arms control frameworks are only one side of the coin to which effective deterrence is the other when we are addressing issues of strategic stability. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Alexandre, and thank you for also invoking this image of deterrence and arms control being on the same coin, but on different sides of it. And also thanks for recalling the work of that the P5 had been doing under French leadership. That was an important piece of work. And you also called on the US to include in their discussions non-strategic nuclear weapons to be subjected to arms control in the discussions with Russia. So before I open the floor, I wanted to ask if Bonnie maybe would want to respond to that, and maybe also say a few things about what we've heard in recent months from the US on a new arms control framework with Russia, what that means, what that could potentially look like. Could that include non-strategic or tactical nuclear weapons, or couldn't it, or would that be a different process?
Great. I guess I'll just kind of give a little background. As many of you already know, the U.S. had a couple of meetings with Russia late last year on strategic stability dialogue. And in those two discussions, we were able to set up a couple of working groups. And these working groups, the idea was to look at a number of issues. I know there's a lot of focus on a follow-on to New START, but we were looking at the strategic environment, and we wanted to look at a number of issues, in addition to what we would cover under a New START treaty, a New START treaty, whatever we'll call it. And so it included a number of things, tactical nuclear weapons or non-strategic nuclear weapons was on the list, as well as a number of other things like emerging technology, space, and novel weapons, hypersonics. So there was a number of things that we were including in those discussions. So yes, that is a topic that has been already included in the discussions that we had with Russia, of course, before they invaded Ukraine, at which time our discussions with them came to an end in terms of the strategic stability dialogue. In addition to that, we continued throughout that process to brief countries on what was going on, particularly our NATO partners, keeping everyone as transparent, keeping ourselves as transparent as we could on those discussions, recognizing the strong concern that a lot of countries have and continue to have on SSD and what might happen in the future, and what we would discuss. In addition to that, I know some of you have been hearing about an upcoming meeting of the Commission of the New START Treaty later this month between Russia and the United States to continue to implement the New START Treaty. There's a lot of interest in that. I hear it all the time in my laterals. Are you talking to the Russians? Also, are you talking to the PRC? But that is going to be happening later this month. So I know that that's been reported. So I just wanted to confirm that that's the plan, at least to have those discussions later this month. So it does include looking at, and I think we should, when we have these conversations with countries, looking at the strategic environment in total to try to look at and discuss many issues that impact security and stability amongst the countries who are in discussion. The only other thing I will say is to pick up on the point about the framework. The framework is not just looking at different issues in discussions, it's also looking at the different types of ways in which we can build transparency and predictability. So, you know, as already been mentioned, Wyndon mentioned this as well, you know, in terms of how we look at the mechanisms to provide some stability in the international environment that's changing so rapidly. And it includes traditional arms control treaties with legally binding, but also risk reduction, crisis management, you know, ways to be transparent. I think we have to be broad in ways in which we work with countries to ensure that we provide ourselves and others with the transparency we need in a very unpredictable environment. So when we talk about arms control, we're talking about the many tools in the toolbox that we can work with to ensure the stability that we need.
All right. Thanks very much, Bonnie, and also for the good news, at least that the Bilateral Consultative Committee is at least programmed to meet again soon. With that, I'm going to open the floor for questions. Good. I see a lot of hands. we have people walking around with microphones? I think we're going to start right here in the front row. And please state your name and where you're from, or your affiliation, and then your question. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Mikhail Kopriyanov. I am a PhD student with the University of York. First of all, thank you to everyone for putting this together and for the panelists for being here. My question kind of piggybacks off of something that you've said, Dr. Smith. You said that it's important not to be trapped in the language of disarmament and kind of try to broaden what it means. I'm quite surprised that not a single panelist has mentioned the TPNW in any context whatsoever. All everyone seems to be talking about is the NPT. What do you have to say to people who say that NPT has done nothing but further embed the existing structure of nuclear weapon states, continuing to possess them, and not engaging in any disarmament efforts whatsoever? Thank you.
All right, I think we'll take a few questions and then turn it back to the panel. The next one is the lady in the third row, and then the gentleman that raises his arm really high in the last row. And with those three, we're going to turn back to the panel, but I've seen the hands raised on my right as well.
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Ikram Midaman. I am a mentee with the Next Generation for Young Women Non-Proliferation and Disarmament program from Morocco, and I'm currently doing my master's degree. First of all, I would like to thank you for your insights and interventions of this this highly renowned speakers today. My question is regarding the weapons and arms that are currently that are still being pumped in Ukraine currently, and it's rather in regard of a post-conflict kind of perception, because if we were learning from the experiences across the globe, as Mr. Alexander mentioned earlier, if we see the Middle East or we see the Sahel, it's never a good scenario when a country is pumped with so many weapons. Once the situation is comes back to stability, there's always problems that escalate afterwards, and I would like to see if there are mechanisms or modalities that are anticipating this situation. And thank you.
Thank you for that question. And then in the back.
Thank you. Armand Kless, Professor Emeritus. I worked in the second half of the 70s and the 80s at Harvard on non-proliferation a long time ago. Most of the people in this room were not born yet, I guess. But the problems are still the same, even if less countries became nuclear powers than expected in those years. I have three brief questions. I try to be very concise. The nuclear, a bit larger. To broaden the debate also. I don't want it to become academic, and it's not an academic meeting. The nuclear powers, at least the Western ones, form a kind of exclusive club, a club that doesn't accept any new members if possible. So how does one justify this policy of prohibition legally, international law, morally, strategically, and who should decide who will be and who should not be a member of that exclusive club? So, second question, briefer. What could be the optimum balance or the optimum number of nuclear states? That's a big debate, perhaps too big for here. My friend John Mersheimer from Chicago, most people know his name, would of course argue as many as possible. Third question, very difficult one, with all kinds of implications. Should, even if I put it very succinctly, should arms control be separated from other issues such as human rights? But then the question is, I think there's no Iranian at this meeting. in past years, before COVID, we had a lot of talks here, and there were Russians, like Vladimir Baranovsky was talking here. But should these arms control issues be separated from human rights and other issues, even conflict, even war? I think it might be more important to talk during acute crisis. Robert Malley, is he still a special envoy, our colleague from the US certainly knows this, for Iran? Or is he now North Korea, or both? He at least said there should be, recently, no talks with Iran anymore on the nuclear program. And he, without saying it clearly, asked, that was implicitly for regime change in Iran. So, but that's a question of priorities and what is more vital. So, sorry, it was more long than I planned, but that's how it goes with professors and other academics and intellectuals.
Yeah. I think I see especially the young generation now laughing very hard at your remark. So there's a lot out there, very different questions. I'd like to give an opportunity to the panel to answer concisely so that we can get in a second round. Maybe take it in reverse order. Now, maybe Alexandre, would you like to start and say a few things? Also, because you have the microphone on this side.
I'll use that privilege. Thank you. So I'll try to take the different questions one by one, and I apologize if it shows that I haven't understood fully what was asked from time to time. First, the ban treaty. Well, we have for nuclear proliferation, non-proliferation and disarmament, we have a law, an efficient one. I mean, yes, it is challenged. It is, the RevCon was not easy, but it's the NPT. As I regularly say, we are, and I think I probably speak also for the US and the UK saying that, but also for the wider international community, we need to implement the NPT fully, all of us. And when it comes to disarmament, the French always add, we need to implement the NPT, the whole of the NPT, and only the NPT. Why? Because the NPT has been the cornerstone of our the non-proliferation disarmament regime for good reasons. It was carefully and well designed. It's associated with measures and mechanisms that can help measure and verify what is being done or what is not being done. All of this is lacking with the ban treaty. The ban treaty, with all due respect to those who signed it and support it, is a nice packaging. And we are all for the a world without nuclear weapons. But the question is how you get there. In our view, the ban treaty proposal is a complete illusion because it creates an apparent other way, but it's not a practical way because it lacks everything that is in the NPT. And one thing is sure, it will lead to no reduction, to no disappearance of nuclear weapons, and it will probably embolden those who anyway had decided that the NPT they could forget about it to follow to try to get to the technologies, the corresponding technologies. The question on anticipating escalation in countries where many weapons are being pumped in, if I understand well the logic from the Moroccan lady, yes? Yes, I understand. well, you always need to anticipate, but if we are speaking about the current situation in Ukraine, I think it's quite different. This is a country facing a massive aggression by a massively superior neighbor. Our policy, and I think it's the right one, was to decide to help Ukraine defend itself. And we have no doubt that the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian armed forces are able to deal with what is being provided to them. Having said that, I mean, it would lead us to a very long discussion to talk about Sahel and other situation of conflict and crisis, because they are quite different and involve different forces, different weapons, different actors. So I'm sorry if I don't answer properly your question. On the nuclear weapon states, how to justify, well, I can give you a French answer. We went through a near-death experience in June 1940. And we said, we never want to find ourselves in that situation. In 1956, we found ourselves at the Suez crisis, in a situation where we were confirmed in our view. And quite interestingly, I think although we don't necessarily exchange on this, but I think the Israelis probably had the same kind of reaction. Never again. You find a way to protect yourself in a very sure way. Now, I would like to insist on one thing. When talking about the P3, I think we are talking about the 3 declared and responsible nuclear states recognized by the NPT. And again, I think the message by President Macron in the UN was that we have a specific responsibility, but that the possession of nuclear weapons reinforced that responsibility. And unfortunately, as much as as our policy and our efforts are to be responsible on all fronts, including disarmament, we see that other states cannot be described this way. And here I'm thinking notably, of course, about Russia, given its recent declarations and behavior. What is sad as well is to see that the promoters of the ban treaty go only after the P3 states, which is the democracies, the countries in which we have debates. The campaign takes place in France as well. There are debates, and it's normal, it's good. But please, ban treaty advocates, go to Russia, go to China, and talk to them as well. It's not only a question for democracies. This is why I was talking about the risks of unilateral disarmament. Well, maybe I was too long already, but
yeah.
So I'll pass on.
Do you want to grab them? Thank you.
Yeah, just a couple of points. I don't think it's fair to say that nothing's been done. I mean, the U.S. has reduced 88% of its nuclear stockpile. And we've obviously had treaties, the START treaty being one. We've had other treaties. And also we have, other multilateral efforts like the CEND, the Creating Environment for Nuclear Disarmament, where we talk with other countries and nuclear weapon state, non-nuclear weapon states. So I think the statement is incorrect. I think it's a blanket statement, and I think you need to be careful when you make blanket statements to make sure that the underlying information is true. Not saying that it won't be done, but I just want to make sure that, when you make a blanket statement like nothing's been done, you just have to kind of be careful with that. Didn't mention the TPNW mainly because I think everyone knows the U.S. position on that, so I don't feel like I need to reiterate that. Just to say very briefly, want to reiterate what Alexandra said about one of the concerns we have is that the TPNW just pull all nuclear weapon states together, and they don't recognize that, generally don't recognize that there's distinction amongst some of the P5 countries, and I think it would do better if there was more care in taking steps that are acknowledge what's being done, acknowledge what's trying to be done, and acknowledge responsibility and non-responsibility. Just try to break that up a little bit and not block everyone, put everyone in one kind of circle, if that makes sense. And I think the other concern is the need to recognize security environments and how that impacts the potential for success. I mean, if you look at the situation right now with Russia and doing nuclear saber rattling, that's not helping the cause of non-proliferation. It's not helping the cause of disarmament. And for those of us who are proponents of arms control, non-proliferation, and disarmament, recognize that you're in a situation where no matter how much you want to do it, it's creating a situation where some countries just don't want to do that anymore or don't believe in that. So that's when we say it has to take into account the security environment. It means you have to recognize that as much as we all believe in the goal of disarmament, or at least a lot of us, at least most of us here, and we certainly understand the goals of the TPNW, the situation is one where you have to recognize the security environment, and you have to take that into account if you're actually going to try to resolve the situation. If you want disarmament, you have to look at what the situation is and deal with that situation and address those challenges, and that's a security environment that has to be recognized. Because if you don't recognize that, you're not going to get to the goal that you want. And then on the question, I think I understand the question about the equipment in Ukraine. I think of it more in terms of is it how much is going in there, and worrying about what's happening with the amount of equipment that's going in there. Because if that is the right question, what I will say to that is the U.S. has actually released about a couple of weeks ago a strategy for how to deal with potential diversion of equipment. And I know that Ukraine also is looking at this issue very seriously to try to address the issue of diversion. We know it's an issue that's going to continue to get attention because, as was said, you know, the U.S. is very committed to the defense of Ukraine and Ukraine's sovereignty. And so we recognize the need to provide Ukraine what it needs to defend itself. But we also understand that there's concerns as well about what's going in and how it could be diverted and how it could be illicit trafficked. And so there has been a strategy that we released a couple weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, that talks about our strategy for dealing with that, and that we're working very closely with Ukraine as well. So I hope that's helpful. Thanks.
All right, and thanks for that. We started a little bit later, so I feel okay with having one more quick round of questions. I think I want to take 4. Let's start with the gentleman on the right.
This is Ali Alkış from the Odessa Center for Non-Proliferation. I have a small question. Correct me, please, if I am wrong. When Ukraine wins the war, I believe it will give positive momentum to non-proliferation efforts because it will prove that a non-nuclear weapon state will win a war against a nuclear weapon state. So it is a good momentum for non-proliferation efforts. So do you think it will give also a good momentum for arms control and disarmament when Ukraine wins the war?
Thank you. And then we'll move a bit to this segment. I see a lady here in the center, and then after that, the gentleman behind her. And the fourth one will go right in front of me because the gentleman had raised his pen already before. Sometimes one overlooks what's right in front.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for organizing this, and thank you so much for this very insightful panel so far. Great start of this conference, I believe. I have 3.5 very quick and easy questions, and I believe the panel can pick and choose what they would reply to. The first is about the role of unilateral measures, not for disarmament that have been mentioned, but unilateral measures for example, reducing nuclear risks, for enhancing transparency, etc. What is the role of these, given the dire state of bilateral, multilateral diplomacy? And a little bit linked to that, have a question. What do you think is the role of declaratory policy for arms control, non-proliferation and disarmament, given the state that we are in? Just reminding of or thinking of the early January joint statement, for example, and then the nuclear signaling by Russia since February. And then my second question is on the role of interests that are necessary for arms control arrangements. I've heard the word trust a lot, but I'm curious to hear maybe panelists. What would be the role of interest for one's own national security as well as the other side's national security or regime security? And lastly, then I'm done, sorry, the third quick question is about the role of allies. Given the integrated deterrence concept of the US, given the fact that the term allies is capitalized in all the recent strategic documents, I wonder what the role of allies is in the quote-unquote new arms control framework that has been mentioned. Thank you.
All right, that's a lot in there.
Hello, Alan Ware from the World Future Council and Parliamentarians for Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament. Our question to the panel: when Putin realizes he can't win this war in Ukraine, which should be about now, it doesn't mean he's going to immediately decide to withdraw. You can see with his narrative that he's fully prepared for an entrenched war for a long time. Is there some way that, in addition to the punishments on Russia for this illegal act of aggression, might there also be some sort of carrot to help him get out and withdraw totally from Ukraine? For example, have you had a look at the proposal put forward by Oscar Arias, Nobel Peace Prize winner from Costa Rica, and Jonathan Granoff from the Global Security Institute in the Hill, which suggested that perhaps something that could be used in some sort of way of helping Putin to get out would be the American nuclear weapons that are housed in NATO bases, because those weapons are not required for the nuclear deterrent, extended nuclear deterrence. That extended nuclear deterrence is provided by the intercontinental ballistic missiles and the submarine-launched ballistic missiles. They're not really needed for any military purposes for nuclear deterrence. So perhaps, like the weapons in Turkey were given up to help sort of end the Cuban Missile Crisis, maybe giving up those weapons deployed in the NATO bases whilst maintaining strong nuclear deterrence from the other weapon systems could be a convincing factor. I was wondering if you've had a look at that proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. And then the final question here right in front. So it's a bit of a walk for the mic, but it's coming. Here.
Thank you very much. I am Carlo Trezza. I'm from Italy. I'm a retired diplomat, and I'm here on behalf of the Union of Italian Scientists for Disarmament. I am puzzled by this concept of the three responsible nuclear weapon states. US, France, and the UK, not because they are because they are irresponsible, but maybe because there are other nuclear weapon states which could join that category. I'm thinking of China, which clearly is insufficiently transparent, but still has a let's say, a moderate number of nuclear weapons, has adopted the concept of non-first use, and also has made unconditional nuclear security assurances. So why not encourage also China to join the club? And after all, what about India? India also has a policy of no first use. So let's try and encourage more countries to join the club. Thank you.
All right, thank you. There's a lot in those questions about China, India, how to get Putin to leave Ukraine, on unilateral measures, declaratory policy, arms control in the context of Ukraine. Bonnie, would you like to try and answer?
Sure. I just on the first question, I wasn't quite sure, unless you want to reinterpret it, but could you ask that question again?
When Ukraine wins the war, it will be a war won by a non-nuclear weapon state against a nuclear weapon state. So it will give a momentum to non-proliferation efforts, because it will prove that you can win a war against a nuclear weapon state. So you don't need nuclear weapons. So do you think it will also help arms control and disarmament efforts in a positive momentum?
Yeah, I would say that's a question that I've been thinking about myself. I don't necessarily have an answer for that, but I think the backdrop of a lot of this is you have Ukraine, which doesn't have weapons, and Russia, which does. And I think a part of this is waiting to see what happens, and to see where that question goes and what happens with that, depending on the outcome. So I would say it's something I've thought about. What does that mean in the long run? I don't have an answer, but it's an obvious question when you look at the dynamics of what's happening on the ground. So kind of stay tuned for that one, I guess. On the question of the role of unilateral measures, I think the thing about unilateral measures is a country will decide, for whatever reason, that something is important enough that they're willing to take a stand on something, and hopefully others will join. And I think the role of these unilateral statements is the fact that a country is unilaterally trying to make a change, trying to change a way we look at something, the way we deal with something. I talked about the first committee U.S. resolution on anti-satellite missile testing, where we got 154 countries to join. That's just one example of many where a country wants to take a lead on something and others will join a norm. Recognizing it's not a legally binding document, but still it's setting hopefully a norm that others will hopefully follow. So I think those kind of things can have an effect in trying to change something. There are a bunch of others you mentioned. The role of allies, I think, obviously is important in this new context, this new framework, this new environment. I talked about how we have often briefed allies and partners in Washington. We've traveled to countries to brief capitals. We've traveled to NATO to brief capitals. We're constantly briefing partners and allies because we recognize that the inclusiveness and their voice in positions that we take is very important to us. So we have to take that into consideration, particularly as we look at the new frameworks and we look at the new environments that we're dealing with. And we want to have input in terms of how we think about these things. And we did that when we were putting together the nuclear posture review, the NPR, the missile defense review. I mean, we asked allies questions, as we were leading up to putting those together. Let's see. I have scribbles here. Putin, what was that about again? Oh, yes. I have not seen that one particularly. I think the question for me is, will it address Putin's concerns? I think the question is, in any kind of effort to try to resolve whatever Putin's issue is. And we've heard lots of ideas about why he does what he does and why he's in Ukraine, why he invaded Ukraine. I think it would depend on what is the reason why he went in there and what would satisfy him. So whether it's that or whether it's something else, I couldn't really say. But I think, you know, you're looking at whatever carrots you can give him to withdraw, to stop and withdraw. A lot depends on what the reasons are. And I'm not, you know, I'm not an expert on Putin's ideas and what he thinks about. I've heard many of them. We all have. But it could be one possible idea, but whether that would work, I don't know for sure. On the question of bringing everyone into the club, we'd love to. I mean, you know, I think one of the concerns we have with the PRC right now is the buildup that we're seeing and the lack of transparency. And the continued efforts to try to get them to talk to us. And can we meet? Can we have a conversation? It could be risk reduction. It could be crisis management. We just want to have a conversation. And the lack of that and the continued buildup is a concern to us. And positions that they're taking in many fora in terms of, you know, international security issues overall has been a concern. But, you know, ways which we can continue to engage countries to do the quote-unquote right thing, you know, so that we all can move toward where we all want to be. You know, sure. I mean, I think, you know, we certainly want to do that. That's what a lot of the effort is that we do. Anything else? I think I'll leave it at that for time, for space time.
Okay. Thanks very much. Alexandre.
Thank you. So, very quickly, on what happens when Ukraine wins the war. First of all, yes, Ukraine needs to win, also because of nuclear reasons. We have to show, I said it explicitly in my intervention, Russia's rhetoric has to fail. If it doesn't fail, others will use the same kind of strategy. So it has to fail. Second, I'm not sure that the conclusion of an end of the conflict by victory of Ukraine, to take this hypothesis, would mean there is no need for nuclear weapons for at least two reasons. One is we have to admit, this also I said explicitly, we were able to help Ukraine as much as we did because NATO exercised a deterrence on Russia. If it was not the case, had we no deterrence, or we the French simply, our margins for maneuver would have probably been reduced. And second, in a post war in Ukraine world, it's more likely that not only in Europe but unfortunately around the world there will be more countries interested to get the means to protect themselves alone, whatever that takes. Hence the importance of non-proliferation and what we are talking about today. Also, I think when the war is over, we should be looking at things like more closely and to include in our discussions things like drones, dual weapons, and a number of other technologies, but this is for the future. Unilateral measures, I'm just glad to say that we feel we are an example of unilateral measures. This is why we keep telling what we accomplished in terms of disarmament, transparency, etc. We would only wish others would follow suit. Declaratory policy. Well, I think declaratory policy helps us simply predict what kind of behavior we'll have. It's not enough, but it's useful. So I think it's always good to have a declaratory policy. And we welcome recently the NPR, very useful and very clear. Trust interest, I leave it aside, too long, but yes, there is something there. Role of allies, yes, extremely important. There, I would just like to say the obvious. NATO is an alliance based on defense and deterrence, and it's based on the deterrence provided by the United States, but the UK and French deterrence play a specific role which help the alliance exert its deterrence, and it complicates the calculation of the potential adversaries. So it's something that is important and good. The carrot and Vladimir Putin, I completely agree with Bernie Jenkins. Is that really what he wants? I think, before invading or renewing the invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February, the Russians proposed two treaties, one of which had as one of its main articles immediate withdrawal of all American nuclear weapons from Europe. If this is what you have in mind, it's a big carrot, and it would be completely counterintuitive to security after such a war. Same goes for the Cuban example. Frankly, I don't think the comparison can hold water. Two completely different stories, and Putin is after something that is really different than just seeking some kind of balance of power. Although, to follow on your question, I would say that, of course, if Belarus becomes a country hosting Russian nuclear weapons, if this is to become true, it was somehow announced, then, of course, not only the engagement taken by NATO in the 90s about not deploying certain assets further east would be questionable. Already, the Russia-NATO agreements are rather, have been violated. So but it would add a question to how to restore balance. And here, the question I had forgotten about, what is the right balance? The right balance is the lowest possible balance of weapons, at least from a French viewpoint. Last, your point, sir, on the club. Absolutely agree. We need, and this is exactly why we need to talk about it. You noticed yourself that the Russians made a statement recently, I think, made a statement that Russia wanted, was also a responsible nuclear weapon state. Fine, good. Let them show that they are. So obviously, it goes without saying, China is more than welcome, but no first use is no measure for responsibility. I mean, China has a no first use policy, but at the same time is developing its arsenal, modernizing it, and has an opaque doctrine. Why? Can they explain that? That would be a good start to have a better idea of actually what NFU is. I stop there. Thanks.
All right. Thanks very much. I think we have to leave it at this. I'm really sorry. I saw there was a lot more questions out there, but we'll have to wrap it up and go to our coffee break. But maybe the speakers will be available in that break to answer any very pressing questions. I'd like to ask you to join me in thanking both panelists. And of course, as well as Wendon, who you already announced had to leave early. For practical reasons, there is a coffee served at the panoramic hall. Do you want to mention a time for people to be back? 20 minutes. And then we'll have another very, very interesting panel lined up. Thank you all.